Thank you, everybody, and thank you for joining us. I'd like to welcome everybody to meeting number 218 of the Planning Committee. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Wadawurrung people, and pay my respects to elders past and present, and to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are part of Greater Geelong today. I'd like to introduce to you the panel. We have on my left Councillor Aiken, Councillor Mansfield, Councillor Sullivan, Councillor Mason, Councillor Maloney and myself, Councillor Grisbeck. We've got no apologies for tonight that I'm noted. And I'd like to introduce to you the officers here on my right-hand side. Leanne Stockley, who's the Principal Planner, Hugh Griffiths, who's the Team Leader Stat Planning, John Rush, who is the Coordinator of Statutory Planning, and Joanne Van Slegeren, who's the Manager of City Development. The procedure for the hearing this evening will be that the officer will present a brief summary of the written report to the committee. The objectors will then have an opportunity to speak to their objection. And we do have approximately a 3-minute allowance for speakers. The applicant will then be able to speak to the application, and then we would ask the applicant to speak for no longer than sort of 5 to 10 minutes, at which time I'll be keeping time. The panel may ask questions of the officer, the applicant or the objectors at any time. And at the end of the presentations, the panel will discuss the application and make a decision. The applicants and objectors should refer their comments through to the panel and not to other parties in the room. And the panel hearing is not a question and answer forum, but a chance for the parties to explain their positions or views to the panel. The decision of this committee is final, and we're acting under the... it's a final decision. We're acting under delegated authority. The applicant has already appealed this to VCAT, and let's have a look. So confirmation of the minutes of the last meeting, which was the 24th of June. Can I have a mover and a seconder? Councillor Mason to move and Councillor Sullivan to second. Is there any declarations of conflict of interest? No? Okay, so the matter before us is PP 1471-2020, which is 9 to 13 Manzine Avenue in Lara. And I'd like to hand over to Leanne to do the officer's report. Thank you.
This development site is located in the southwest corner of the overall Manzine Village subdivision and has street frontages.
Sorry, can I just get you to bring your microphone a little bit closer to you? Yeah, thank you.
And it has street frontages to Petulus Road, Manzine Avenue and O'Halloran's Road. The site has an area of 2.19 hectares. Lot sizes within the Manzine Village subdivision range from 300 to 600 square metres, with typical development of those lots for single-storey and some double-storey dwellings. Smaller dwelling lot sizes in the Greater Lara Township vary between 100 square metres and 300 square metres, provide convenient housing options for various sectors of the Lara community. An example of similar lot sizes can be seen in Cameron Crescent, which is adjacent to the Manzine Village subdivision to the east. The adjacent Lara West growth area will eventually provide for education facilities, active open space and local activity centre in the vicinity of the Manzine Village subdivision. The site has previously been proposed for a development of 89 dwellings and removal of native vegetation. That application was given consideration by the committee in May of 2020. The committee decided to advise VCAT that council would have refused the application. This was due to the applicant submitting an appeal to VCAT prior to council having the opportunity to make a decision. The application then progressed to a decision by VCAT in October 2020. The VCAT decision affirmed that this is a medium density development site and that the proposal generally met that criteria. However, it was the detail of the design that resulted in VCAT deciding not to grant a permit. The detail of concern included that proposed landscaping was unsatisfactory, that there was a lack of physical breaks in the built form to the road frontages, that the intensity of the rear-loaded dwellings was not responsive to the neighbourhood character, the proposed development form to Petulus and O'Halloran Road intersection was unsatisfactory, that the proposed 3 metre setback to the north boundary was unsatisfactory, that the proposed pedestrian spaces provided by trafficable footpaths was insufficient, and that they recommended that a development of a lesser intensity should be able to increase open space provisions for larger dwellings and potentially include a communal area. The application here has sought to address those matters raised and now seeks approval for the development of the land for 84 dwellings and the removal of native vegetation. Key features of this development include dwellings in attached form in pods of 4 with separation between those pods, internal shared vehicle space of 5.5 metres in width with additional pedestrian paths of 1 metre in width, service road to Petulus Road Reserve, pedestrian access available through the site to Manzine Avenue, Petulus Road and O'Halloran's Road, 17 visitor car park spaces spread throughout the internal accessways, total car park capacity of 144 spaces, with the requirement under the planning scheme being 143. Landscaping proposed to common areas and individual dwelling spaces, and a communal outdoor space is provided to the north boundary with indicative communal garden and outdoor furniture. The application was referred to all internal and external units, and their comments are included in the report. Consistent with the previous application, this application is exempt from notice and review provisions under the development plan overlay. However, it was considered that council-led informal notice should be undertaken. At the end of the notice period, 211 submissions were received. As the application is exempt from review provisions, the typical rights of appeal to VCAT are not available to submitters as part of this application. Submissions received raised similar concerns to this proposal as with the previous application. Community concerns included the density of the development, lack of response to neighbourhood character, traffic generation and car parking concerns, decline in property value, and concern for future occupant quality. The application was assessed against the relevant policies of the planning policy framework and found to be an acceptable response to policies that support housing supply, diversity and affordability. Whilst it is noted that the location at this time does not have the ideal provision of community services and infrastructure, this will become available when the Lara West growth area adjacent progresses. The assessment also considered the proposal's response to the Manzine Development Plan design principles and the VCAT matters of concern. The proposal has sought to address these concerns and provide an improved response to neighbourhood character and provision of urban design aspects to allow integration into the greater subdivision and provision of improved occupant amenity. It must be noted that the medium density designation of this site will result in a proposal that is inherently different to the typical character that surrounds this location. The objective being to provide housing supply for all sectors of the community as opposed to supply of more traditional housing stock that caters for only a portion of the community. Pages 76 to 80 of the assessment report considers the changes proposed by the application to address the matters raised by VCAT. The assessment found that the changes made appropriately respond to the matters, including separation of the continuous built form. Dwellings are now proposed in groups of 4 with the frontage extent of around 30 metres, which is similar to 2 traditional dwelling frontages. Increased passive surveillance throughout the site due to the reduction of rear-loaded dwelling formats. Provision of dual frontage dwelling design at the Petulus and O'Halloran's Road corner. This dwelling design and adjacent 2-storey forms now provide for a visual scale and aesthetic response to this exposed intersection. Transition of lot sizes away from the northern boundary interface. This has been achieved by the new design, providing landscaped areas and internal road to the majority of this boundary, with the typical residential form to the north. pedestrian safety and amenity through provision of separated footpaths throughout the development. Increase to the quantity and quality of landscaping proposed, which includes a mix of both exotic and indigenous species. And a decrease in intensity of the dwelling numbers provides a greater opportunity for increased amenity both internally and externally. The applicant has again decided to lodge an appeal at VCAT due to the responsible authority's failure to determine the application within the required statutory time period of 60 days. As such, the determination here will again be providing a recommendation for consideration at the upcoming VCAT hearing. Overall, it's considered that the proposal has made satisfactory revisions to improve upon the aspects that were identified by the tribunal as lacking. On balance, the provision of residential development that provides for a diversity of choice, inherent affordability, and contributes to sustainable development is considered to provide a net community benefit, and therefore the proposal warrants support under the provisions of the planning scheme. It is recommended that the proposal be supported by Council at the forthcoming VCAT hearing, subject to conditions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillors, do you have any questions for the officers at this point? No? Okay, thank you very much, San. We might head straight to the submission. So I have Ron Ostrowicki. Please come to the front. And you've got around about 3 minutes to make your submission, please. Thank you.
My name is Ronald Ostrowski, and I live on Manzine Avenue, very close to the site of the proposed density living development. So just very briefly, on stage one, Declan probably misled a lot of us by suggesting before we purchased our blocks that this would be a commercial development area. So that's one thing I'd like to point out.
Sorry, can I just ask you to take off your mask? That makes it a lot easier for us to hear you. Thank you. And pull that a little bit closer to you. Thank you very much.
Okay. So that's the issue there. But my major concern is that, the officer here talked about or assumed some commercial development in the future. Well, we don't even hear wind of it. So the rationale of having density living in this locality without public transport, without commercial development, and on the very busy Elko and Petulus Road as it is now, and then with an entrance and exit into Manzine Avenue, which even with all the occupants of the early stages of the Manzine Village development is busy as it is. So you're now going to add 84 dwellings, and they will all have cars, one or two, and it's very close to the intersection of Petulus. Now, I come in and out of that intersection, and sometimes you have to wait, and sometimes you have to wait for the traffic to go by, so that's going to make it very busy and potentially dangerous. The other thing that perplexes me is that there's no entrance or exit to O'Halloran's, because that's going to be a very wide road. And the third point I want to make is there's some vagaries that they will have a footpath at O'Halloran's, but will not be doing anything about sealing and widening that last portion of dirt road that goes on to Petulus Road. In fact, there are 3 power poles leaning one way or the other. There's no indication who's going to remove those, because certainly they're not servicing the existing dwellings or residents. There's only one left now, because the old white house has been demolished this week. That's on the corner of O'Halloran's and Petulus. So these are the key issues, and these are my concerns.
Thank you very much. Councillors, got any questions for the objector? So I've got a question for you so you live in the Manzine Avenue estate? Yep. And when you had bought into this property, what was it told to you that was going to go there?
Well, they provided us with a map. So that map clearly indicated commercial development. And as I moved in, all sorts of rumours abounded, that Aldi's would move in there, a service station would be there, cafe perhaps, to give us some quality of living. So far, all I see in West Lara is just residential. No indication of any commercial development.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Maloney?
Thank you so much for your submission. You mentioned that the road is already quite busy and that it has some potential danger to using that the exit from the potential development. Have you cited any incidences or near misses type of thing in that area, or have you witnessed or heard of anything of that nature?
Well, we do have a few hoons, and they'd like to do burnouts on that roundabout. One actually went off the road and knocked over a light pole adjacent to my property. Could have easily gone through my bedroom, but that's just one issue. I've got a retaining wall in my front yard to prevent that from happening. But apart from the hoons, I'm looking at where that estate is located. The nearest street is further back from that. There's a few people here who actually live on that street. But this is going to make it much closer to the intersection. So people coming in would probably have, 20 metres before they have to stop and wait for someone to come out of that development.
In your view, given that information or that assumption, do you find that there would be there's a traffic management solution that hasn't been considered in this case? Like for example, lights or something to that effect?
I'm not an expert on traffic, but just to the naked eye, it doesn't look very safe.
Thank you, Councillor Maloney. Councillor Mansfield.
Thank you. I was just wanting to clarify the issue around access from O'Halloran's Road. I think I read in the report that there would be, in these new plans, there would be access to properties from O'Halloran's Road, but the road would need upgrading, and that is not something that council would be responsible for. Is that correct?
That's
It'd be
a
good
question
maybe
for
for
the
the
officer.
officers.
Yep.
I just wanted to clarify that point. Yeah.
Yep. Please use your mic.
There are a number of dwellings in this particular design that do have direct access to O'Halloran's Road. They are towards the northern portion of the boundary that interfaces O'Halloran's Road. The southern portion, those lots there are rear-loaded because it is too close to the ultimate signalised intersection that will occur at O'Halloran's and Petulus Road. So that portion of O'Halloran's Road, it is to be upgraded generally by the developer that fronts that. In this case, if the entirety of O'Halloran's Road is not upgraded by the time that this development goes, if it does go ahead, then the developer here will be responsible for that portion.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your submission. Lionel McWilliam, please. Thank you. Oh, sorry, we just need to quickly do our COVID thing. Thank you, Joe. Lionel?
Good evening, councillors. Thank you for listening to me. My name is Lionel McWilliam and I am a Lara resident. Net community benefit. This appears to be the new phrase in most officer reports regarding new developments. I say, in regard to this townhouse development, there is absolutely no net community benefit, but more a case of net community detriment, big time. This is completely out of character with other developments in Lara, especially in this area. If this is allowed to proceed, it will create a precedent and give the green light for out-of-control developments in Lara. From the officer's report, the section on urban design, this is it here, pages 54 to 57, states that it is unsupportive of this development due to remaining design concerns, and it's all written in there. I won't go through it, it takes too much time. You know this is already going to VCAT. I can't understand how the officer's report recommends that this be approved when it is basically no different to what was proposed and rejected the first time by both Council and VCAT, or the Tribunal. Is all your rejections previously. I'm asking the councillors to once again reject this development on the same grounds as what was determined at the meeting on the 28th of May 2020, and that's that there. So my conclusion is that it might only be 5 townhouses less, but that area, the whole character, is going to be destroyed. I'm not against development in other places, and something else better could be done there. As it was said by the previous gentleman, it was meant to be a service area. Now, the people who back onto that area, what's going to happen to the value of their houses? They're all going to go down. I know we need socio-economic housing, but not of this description. And I've had a look at the plan, and I looked at the roadworks in there and the paths that the trucks would take, and they cut corners. They show us the tracking of the truck if it was to go through there. You get 2 cars side by side in that street and none of these trucks will get through. For the garbage, the fire brigade, or anywhere else. And as I just said before, in conclusion, I'm asking councillors to once again reject this monstrosity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lionel. Questions from councillors for Lionel? Got off that one, Lionel. Thank you very much. I have on my list Barry White, please. Okay.
Good evening, councillors, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Barry White. I'm speaking on behalf of the Lara Care Group. And as already indicated, we've looked at this once before and it was rejected for many of the same reasons I think that we will be highlighting again through this submission. It's the second application for this site, but the changes appear to be marginal at best. It remains an intensive high-density townhouse development which is unsuitable for a rural township such as Lara. The original proposal was for 89 townhouses with a density of 40.5 residences per hectare. The latest application is for 84 townhouses with a density of 38.2 residences per hectare. So it's still quite a high density. It's certainly at the high end of the medium density scale. And in fact, that's a point made in the planning assessment. It notes that given the proposal is at the higher end of the medium density scale, ideally this proposed intensity of development should be in a location where appropriate services are available. It conflicts with key considerations for Lara in the Greater Geelong Planning Scheme, which among other issues states that the rural landscape setting is important to the character of the town, and among its objectives it lists to protect the rural landscape setting of the township. The planning report also states that the purpose of the general residential zone is to encourage development that respects the neighbourhood character of the area. A balance is required to achieve development that provides both housing diversity at reasonable densities and response to the character of a typical suburban context. This fails those objectives. It is out of character with the existing neighbourhood, and as stated in the planning report, page 74, the proposal somewhat deviates from the character of the locality, and the attached form is clearly a feature of the design that is at odds with the existing character. The report notes it is considered that this proposal is of a scale and extent of attached form that is at odds with the predominant neighbourhood character of the Manzine Village subdivision. Such a highly concentrated, intense development in the township is completely unnecessary given the number of new residential developments which have been announced, primarily to the west of the township, and that will add considerably to the stock of housing which will be available. The high concentration of residents, which will be over 200 people, estimated at the site, will add to vehicle traffic and parking congestion, increased traffic flow from the proposed site, and congestion at the Six Ways roundabout, and Station Lake Road, the main arterial leading to the rail crossing, the rail station and the main shopping precinct will be severely impacted. Required infrastructure has not been satisfactorily addressed, and entry and exit access to the proposed site is inadequate, as is visitor parking, internal road widths and roadside parking, which will not provide for required movement of emergency and service vehicles. It is a considerable distance to the main shopping area, around 2.5 kilometres, and the rail station, around 3.5 kilometres, schools and other infrastructure. The suggestion that these will be eventually provided for with development of the Lara West developments provides no guarantees at all. The report's conclusion on page 81 states that current services in this location are lacking. However, planning is required to consider future context as well as the immediate conditions, whatever this means. It's certainly no guarantee that services will be provided. There is little provision for safe pedestrian movement, and there is little provision for amenity and open space for residents, particularly children. References made to 262 square metres of communal open space to provide kickabout space, whatever that means, develop community relationships and share pride of place. This is supposed to cater for 250 or more adults and children in an area of 16 metres by 16 metres. In fact, according to the planning assessment, there is no communal open space. I wish to conclude just by commenting on the use of the development planning overlay process which was used in respect of this particular site, which exempted the need for notice and restricted opportunities for objections. And we now note that the typical rights of appeal to VCAT are not available to submitters as part of this application. This process challenges transparency, natural justice and procedural fairness in dealing with important development matters, and we strongly question a process that denies community review and restrictions that challenge the notion of net community benefit when many in the community have been prevented from objecting. So we object to the planning report's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. Councillors, questions for Barry, please. Barry, I've got a question for you. Obviously, you presented to the last panel, or I think it was maybe been online at that point. You've seen the new application. What are your views about the access, then the pedestrian access now through to O'Halloran's? They have provided that as part of the new application. So my question is around what are your views about the number of properties coming down, but also that they have addressed some of the things in the application?
It is true that some of the issues that have been raised previously have been addressed, but they're marginal. I mean, they are very small developments in the context of what we're talking about here, which is a major, intense residential development, townhouse development. And as I said last time, this is the sort of thing we might expect to see in Melbourne or in the city centre, but not in a rural residential township such as Lara, where we're still trying to protect the characteristics that I mentioned. There's also issues of access to into the township for shopping and so forth. I know last time it was mentioned or proposed or suggested that it was within walking distance. It's not. People will be required to drive to major centres. Public transport isn't really provided to that site. So we just find it's the wrong sort of development in that location. And given what's happening in Lara West with the major residential developments there, we just don't see the need for this sort of intensity because it's marginal at best.
Thank you. Councillors, no questions? Thank you, Barry, for your submission. Is there any other people in the gallery in relation to this submission that's not the applicant? I've got a few more people in the room that I anticipated on my list. So anyone else wish to speak? Okay. No? All right. We'll go straight then to the applicant. Now, Anna and Chris, I'm not sure who wants to go first, so I'm leaving it open to yourselves. You both can sit there as long as you sit 1.5 metres apart. Thank you. So Anna and Chris. So Chris, you're from Oriana, the developer, and Anna, you're with the owner or the developer.
With SJB Planning.
JB Planning. Okay. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to say a few words this evening on behalf of the permit applicant. So my name's Anna Thang from SJB Planning, the planning consultants for this project, and with me is Chris Raywood from Oriana Property Management. So Council's planning officers have undertaken a very detailed assessment of the planning permit application, and we wholly endorse the officers' recommendation that a planning permit should issue, subject to permit conditions. As set out in the officer's assessment, the project team have reviewed VCAT's refusal and the previous officer's recommendations in detail and have addressed each criticism and taken on board suggestions to genuinely improve the proposal. The current proposal before you is a significant improvement on the proposal that was previously refused, particularly from an amenity impact and urban design perspective. There are now only 5 dwellings adjacent to the northern boundary, where there were previously 12. This is the only boundary with an interface with existing dwellings. All other boundaries of the site are to roads, namely O'Halloran's Road to the west, Petula's Road to the south, and Manzine Avenue to the east. There are no shadow impacts to the adjoining dwellings on account of their northern location relative to the site. There are no overlooking impacts, as all the proposed dwellings on that interface are single level, and the interface will also be landscaped with a variety of canopy trees and upright trees. A 261 square meters communal open space will also be provided adjacent to the northern interface, where none was previously provided. As we've also mentioned previously, pedestrian access has been significantly improved. The dwellings fronting onto O'Halloran's Road and Petula's Road have been grouped in 4s, with breaks in between them. This is in line with council officers' previous recommendation. There were previously 6 dwellings grouped together. The rear loaded lots have also been significantly reduced. The number of dwellings has been reduced by 5 since the previous refusal, which on the face of it may not appear to be a significant reduction. However, the amended design and layout affords greater amenity and efficiency. It also affords an improved streetscape presentation and urban design outcome. We say that the number of dwellings should not be the only metric used to evaluate the proposal, but it should be considered holistically. There are no unacceptable traffic impacts arising from the proposal. Car parking has been provided in line with the statutory requirements. Council's traffic engineer was satisfied with the proposal subject to permit conditions relating to detailed design. And significantly, the proposal complies with all of the objectives of Res Code, the design guidelines set out in the amended development plan, and its nomination as a medium-density development site. The proposed development being predominantly single-level, within a location that will be close to amenities and facilities, will deliver a housing product that's targeted at first-home buyers and downsizers, and this directly addresses Council's policy to increase diversity of the city's housing stock to help cater for the growing trend of smaller households, affordable housing, aging in place, low maintenance housing, and strong demand for housing in high amenity locations. This type of housing product is underrepresented within the Lara and Greater Geelong area, where most dwellings are standard/traditional lot sizes of 300 to 500 square meters. On balance, the proposal will provide a net community benefit, and in reaching a decision tonight, we respectfully request you keep at the forefront of your minds the proposal's high degree of consistency and compliance with the planning policies and controls in the Geelong planning scheme and your officer's support for the application. I'll pass over to Chris Raywood, who will also say a few words.
Good evening, councillors. I don't propose to talk for too long, other than to just quickly give a little bit of background on Oriana Property Group. We've been in existence for some 15 years, a private organisation, but we've done a lot of community and residential development throughout Melbourne over that 15-year period. We also deliver a lot of childcare centres and other retail assets. We're also in the process of to go to council for a childcare and some retail facilities down at Armstrong Creek. Obviously, there's been a fair bit of conjecture around this application for a period of time. We acknowledge that. What we'd like to stress is that Oriana, as a group, we do take our responsibilities with this sort of development seriously. Our responsibilities extending to the requirement to provide community facilities and living premises for the local community and those that are going to occupy them. So everything from design through to landscaping through to the way it presents to the community and the way it functions within that community we do take seriously. And we've worked pretty closely, or very closely, with the council officers on this one, particularly in recent times following the feedback from VCAT, which we had to acknowledge and accept that was a concern to that body, and we've subsequently spent a lot of time to try and really make sure that we get this proposal in a form that is deliverable and accepted as best it can be by the people that will live in it and the local community. So from that point of view, we certainly encourage council to take on board those views. We are certainly intent on delivering the product as soon as possible. If we're successful in securing a permit, we run our own construction business, so we'll deliver that ourselves. And there'll be circa $15 million worth of construction development. And certainly where possible, we'd look to engage local trades, etc., to work on the construction side of things. And I guess just finally, as Anna has pointed out, which is a very, very real predicament in today's economic climate, and that is affordable housing and a diversity of product for a diverse group of people that want to occupy these types of dwellings, first home buyers and others that need to have access to some of the lower priced products, which is important and increasingly, as I'm sure you'd be aware, is getting hard to find throughout both Greater Geelong and other parts of Melbourne and beyond. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. Councillors, I'm going to throw to you for questions at this point. Councillor Mason.
Thank you, Councillor Grisbeck. I'm just interested in how you came to the decision on the size of the recreational space that's been allocated as opposed to the number of houses and the reduction from, was it 89 to 84?
Anna might want to add something. Look, there was no particular formula, Council, as to how we arrived at it. That and partially located it, having acknowledged the
Sorry, can I just get you to speak into the mic? Because we're live streaming, we need to make sure we can hear your voice.
Sorry,
thank you.
Apologies. Obviously we applied as much open space as we felt we could, and certainly placed it in that position where hopefully it's contributing to the interface with the properties to the north.
Thank you, Councillor Mason. I've got a question for you in relation to, obviously they were submissions, they couldn't be objections because of the overlay that's provided at Manzine Avenue. Did you take into account any of those submissions? Did you reach out to anyone and have a chat to them about the development?
No, we didn't directly. Obviously we read them and certainly took them into account, and as we worked through processes and matters with the council officers, we certainly had regard where we felt we could, and in particular the design, where we tried to attribute a lot of attention to a lot of the design aspects of the dwellings. But to answer your question about direct involvement or contact with the objectors or the submitters, no, we didn't.
Yeah. I think from my perspective, there was 211 submissions made. So from having been in this position for a few months in terms of the planning chair, that seems a lot. And I guess from my perspective, those neighbours that were direct, that would sort of abut that top end of the property, there was no engagement directly with that group of people either. That
Not sure that we received objections with addresses on them. We just received a summary, so we didn't really have the opportunity to find out which ones were directly opposite that had objected.
I just then asked the officers in terms of what was supplied to the applicant was it's because I've got a list of submitters here and they have names and addresses. So I wondered, was that provided to the applicant?
As far as I understand, the applicant receives a summary plus the addresses that go with it.
Okay, so there's probably a bit of difference there, but I think from my perspective, if the addresses were supplied, I find it a little difficult that we didn't sort of engage with that group, given, and I'm sure that you follow social media as well, so you would have seen some of the things that had gone around about their views on these things. Councillor Aiken, did you have a question?
Yeah, look, I should, when, we've been through this process before, but a different questioning I have this time is, VCAT was quite disappointed about your landscape plans last time. What are you actually going to significantly change to reflect that? And I still can't have concerns that you're asking us to remove native vegetation, but your landscape plans actually don't show any respect towards the native grasslands that actually exist in that area. So you actually had a real opportunity to try to show some respect. So what are you proposing different this time to appease council and also VCAT?
What I understood from the VCAT decision was they had criticisms about the lack of Indigenous planting and the focus on exotic planting in the previous application. And this time around, we've definitely focused more on Indigenous planting and native planting where possible. We're providing canopy trees and upright trees along the interface between us and the northern interface to provide a bit of screening between us and the neighbours. And I believe we've got one canopy tree for each dwelling along the Patulos Road and O'Halloran's Road frontages.
And I appreciate you talking about trees, but the fact is this actually is an area that traditionally doesn't have trees. It's actually native grasslands which didn't have trees on it. So are you proposing to actually take specimens from the native grasslands to be actually part of your landscape proposal or not?
Short answer is no.
Okay, thank you. No, that helps. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Aiken. Any other questions whilst we have the applicants here? Thank you very much for your presentation. We'll now deliberate and make a decision. Councillors, have you got any further questions either of the officers at this point? Councillor Aiken?
This is a general question to the planning officers. VCAT just wasn't critical of the applicant. They were critical that council actually had allowed approval had suggested originally for approval when they identified significant, I think there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so it was about 8 specific areas of concern that VCAT actually had for the proposal. Why would us as councillors should have confidence that all of those issues have been resolved this time when the original position, it was actually the councillors that voted against it? Why should we have confidence that VCAT is going to be content with the new plan? Like, what's giving the planning officers confidence when it was, in fact, it really meant that the officers were rejected last time and the applicant were rejected last time by VCAT? So what is going to give us confidence that our planning officers have also responded to those VCAT concerns?
Good question. Look, the last assessment did identify that there were areas of the proposal that were lacking. It was my assessment that those particular matters could be made revisions of, subject to conditions of the permit. There is opportunity to do that with planning permits to effectively gain change out of a proposal through a recommendation of conditions. So that's how the previous assessment went. This time, the planning application that's been submitted addressed not only the matters that were raised by VCAT, but also some of those matters that were raised as part of my previous recommendation and that list of amended conditions that was the previous recommendation.
Thank you. I've got a further question just around the urban design comments through from our inner department referral. We talk about that the your comment says that the urban design unit have assessed, and however there's still additional concerns. You talk that the concerns are not considered to be weighted significant enough to warrant a recommendation to refusal, but you're saying the next sentence that given the proposal progression to VCAT, it's recommended that the applicant take on the advice. How can we be sure that the urban design queries are going to be taken into account if we approve the application tonight?
To be honest, you couldn't be sure. No, I agree with that. I should say that the matters that urban design continued to be unsatisfied with were only 2 matters, and they were for side fences, which I noted in my report is something that you do experience in a normal residential setting. In some cases, you can't get away from side fences on street interfaces with corner allotments. And the other thing was to include some additional canopy trees to, I think, the southern side of one of the internal access roads. And for my mind, that was a minor matter. So, look, I would hope that the applicant did take on board the advice, but no, I can't give you any assurance that they will.
Yeah, I think... they talked about the previous application and also this application around that the dwelling intensity is too great. When I heard one of the submissions say that it is the high end of medium density, can you explain that to me? What that high end, what numbers are we talking?
So, Council's settlement strategy has really identified or given a definition to what medium density is, and that's between 20 and 40 dwellings per hectare. Excuse me, I'll pull that closer. So in this case, it is reduced that little bit to actually, still on the higher end, but comfortably within that definition, 20 to 40 per hectare.
So is the correct statement that the one of the submissions made is that it sits at 38.2? Is that correct? Okay, so it sits at the high end of medium density. When you say high density, what's that range in terms of the settlement strategy?
Yeah, so that's 40 and above, and generally a different type of dwelling format, so more your apartment style.
Yeah. Thank you. Councillors, any further questions? Councillor Aiken?
To the planning officers, again, it's in relation to the issue of native vegetation. So what expert advice do we actually receive to actually make a judgment that we will grant a permit to be able to remove native vegetation? So educate us about what we actually do to be able to make that assessment. Yeah.
So in this particular circumstance, the assessment was twofold in that we have Council's internal department environment unit who are qualified to make that assessment with regards to native vegetation. And the second portion of it was a referral to the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning. That was required because this particular vegetation is in a road reserve, so effectively Crown land. So both of those units came back with a decision or the determination that the particular native vegetation there, the grasslands in the Petulus Road Reserve, was degraded and unlikely to provide any contiguous mass of native vegetation to be saved in an ongoing manner. It doesn't make a large parcel that could be set aside for, future, land reclaiming or anything. So that was their position, that it was a parcel that could be lost.
It sounds like a house that gets demolished by neglect that has historical value. So in other words, we've got native grasslands that are neglected, so we're just going to decide to build something over the top of them. So all right, thank you. Yep.
Councillors, any further questions? No? At this stage, I'd like to move an alternate recommendation. I'll read that alternate recommendation because I've added a clause to one I'd put in earlier. So this is in relation to this site address at 9 to 13 Manzine Avenue. That I'm going to read it, it's quite lengthy. So that the responsible authority, having considered all the matters which the Planning Environment Act 1987 requires it to consider, recommending to VCAT to refuse the grant of planning permit for buildings and works for the construction of 84 dwellings and the removal of vegetation on the road reserve of Pachulas Road at 19 to 13 Manzine Avenue and the road reserve of Pachulas Road, Lara, on the following grounds. The proposal is not consistent with the objectives of Clause 15, which is a built environment and heritage, and including Clause 15.015S, neighbourhood character, as it does not respond to the existing neighbourhood character or reinforce the value pattern of dwelling spacing and subdivision. The proposal is not consistent with with the strategies of Clause 16.01-1S, which is housing supply, including to encourage higher density housing development on sites that are well located in relation to jobs, services and public transport. The proposal is not consistent with the strategies of Clause 21.06, which is settlement and housing, including Clause 21.06-6, which is neighbourhood character, as is not responsive to nor respectful of the character of the area. The proposal is not consistent with Manzine Development Plan. The Development Plan Overlay Schedule 29, as density proposed, is excessive and in its delivery of medium density. The proposal does not sufficiently respond to the objectives and or standards of Clause 55, including neighbourhood character, daylight to new windows objective and the private open space objective. The proposal is not consistent with Clause 65.01 of the Greater Geelong Planning Scheme, including the purpose of the zone, the orderly planning of the area, the effect of the amenity of the area and the density of the proposed development. And item number 7 is that the proposal would result in the removal of, what was the word, Councillor Aiken? Remnant nature grassland species, which would be detrimental to the preservation of the native vegetation in the local area. Now, I'm moving that. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Aiken to second. I'll just make the opening comment. It's disappointing that we sit here again to look at another development plan which on the outside doesn't look much different to the previous application. With 16 pages of conditions, to me means that we haven't got it right. I don't think the applicant has it right. I think that we've got an application that sits before us that is obviously, in my view, is deficient of some of the things that we were asked of them last time. And for 16 pages of that, I'm confused as to how we've recommended it for approval. As I said before, the urban design concept doesn't support it. We've got many referral authorities in here that have given pages and pages of things that need to be done for the permit, which means to me that they've tried to help the proposal over the line without actually making some clear statements as to what we expect as a community. I think we are at the very high end of medium density. I think that the applicant has, in my view, has tried slightly to change the map around so that those properties on Manzine Avenue don't have 4 or 5 dwellings on their back fence. But I still feel it is too high. With 211 submissions, even though the process is a submission process, not an objection process, which means to me that it wasn't necessarily put out there to the broader community that knew about it. So I think if this was in a normal planning process, my view would be that it may get a higher number of submissions or objections. And I just think we can't keep allowing the building or development of these types of things without the services that come with them. I constantly get spoken to in the community about development goes first before services, and therefore current services are they're overrepresented, they're overused in terms of the current system. So we will, and I get that the developer has said that they want to get on and crack on and do this, but in my view, this will happen years and years before the services will sit in Lara West. So for that reason, I'm recommending the alternate recommendation. Councillor Aiken?
Thank you, Chair Griesbeck. And look, I think you've actually summed it up very well. I'm disappointed that the communities had to go through again the same process to actually assess this. It is extremely time consuming for the community to be able to do that. And the level of objections should give the council group confidence about where they should sit in their recommendation, because they haven't lost their passion and commitment against this proposal. They've actually been able to maintain it, considering that it feels like we're deja vu and Groundhog Day for us, because we're all going through it again. And I think it is appropriate for us to mention, as we did the first time, although it's legally acceptable that the original planning overlay was established so that it could fast track and facilitate commercial development, it is not ethical that planning overlay is allowing residential development to occur on this site location. And it is wrong that ethics cannot be taken into consideration with this planning overlay and process as well too. The evidence that was presented to us the first time by the submitters was nearly everybody who purchased in Menzina Avenue estate made it quite clear that they were attracted to the fact that this was going to be commercial development and not residential development, that this was actually part of the services that were going to be provided at that site location. And because of a technicality that an overlay can be changed to from commercial development to residential development, a far greater financial and return could be seen by an investor, and essentially the community is being sidetracked from this process. And as a consequence, I'm not going to accept that. And if it does mean that it influences my decision to reject the application, well, it does, because it is not ethical that a planning overlay that was established for commercial purposes is being abused and used to support an overdevelopment of residential development at this site, because that's exactly what is happening in terms of this before the councillors. And Kylie has said it correctly. Lara is still a rural living residential community. For anybody to suggest that an 85 high density housing development is acceptable in a rural residential community does not understand at all what rural residential living is. And as a consequence, it should be rejected. And I look forward to VCAT making the same decision that they did the first time with this application as well too.
Councillor Aiken. Any other councillors want to speak on this matter? Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I endorse both the words of yourself and Councillor Aiken. I do recall the last time this application came towards us, I was chair of that specific meeting as a planning portfolio holder. And I am in just absolute disbelief that this application has come back to us in the current form that it is in. In essence, this is the same application as prior. These changes are absolute bare minimum that are needed to come towards this chamber again, which shows that these changes are not, they are completely aligned towards the developers' wants. They are zero aligned to the community's needs, which have had significant outpouring. We've heard so much in this community, and this is not what they want, and it's not what they need. Zero community engagement just absolutely backs that up. And frankly, in my opinion, it's no wonder that the word developer has become a dirty word in our communities today. To come in and try to put as many houses, many townhouses, on just over two acres and get out again, it's incredible. You can say that this is all about building low-cost housing for a diverse array of people, but it's still 400 metres away from a bus stop and 1.5 kilometres from a train station. It's just the access, the traffic, the congestion. This will cause accidents, it will cause deaths. I cannot believe that we're reviewing this again, and I think this whole situation is deplorable, and I would vote against this 1,000 times if I could.
Thank you, Councillor Sullivan. Councillor Mansfield.
Thank you, Councillor Grisbeck. Look, I am fresh to this application. I wasn't at the last hearing on this matter, and so I've read through the application and officer's report carefully. I too harbour some concerns, particularly about the adequacy of the changes in addressing the points VCAT had made in their decision, and in particular, although we haven't, the recommendation hasn't weighted the issues highlighted by urban design heavily. I do have significant concerns, given the VCAT decision, around the points regarding the intensity of the dwelling being inappropriate for the location and context of the site, because it's not located in close proximity to existing or future amenity or services. So that's where I hold real concern. I certainly appreciate that we have a real and growing need for more affordable housing and more diversity of housing types, and that will mean we have, as a community, we have to make some difficult decisions at times. But in order for those for increased density living to be, and that type of housing to be livable for people, that there is that real need for proximity to amenity and services. There's also the concerns around internal amenity, and although I appreciate that there have been some changes to try and address those amenity concerns, it is noted that there's still ongoing concerns about the internal amenity there, and again, that comes down to the livability of that development for potential future inhabitants. So my concerns, my primary concern is really around the adequacy that or with which this application addresses those original VCAT concerns. In addition, I think Councillor Grisbeck highlighted, I guess, in some of her questioning, the importance that, particularly as councillors, we place on engagement with the local community, and it's, I think, always helpful if there's been efforts to proactively engage with the community on these matters, although that's not directly a planning matter, and we are considering the planning policy and planning issues before us. I think some of these issues may have been highlighted more, may have been able to be worked through with some more community engagement, because the local residents would understand as well the access to those existing and future amenities and services. They've highlighted that they themselves need better access to those, and so if we were to put a development of this sort of density in that location, my concern is really that it just won't necessarily, the people that live there won't have adequate access to the services that they need, and therefore it won't necessarily be it's not the right place for that intensity of dwelling. But I think at some point in the future, we are going to have to start looking at where we can locate some of these high, medium and higher density dwellings to address that really significant need for more affordable housing and smaller housing types for people who are smaller households, because that's a real gap in the market, and we acknowledge that as a council. We've acknowledged that in our policies, but the locations really need to be appropriate so that the people can access public transport and other services that they might be needing.
Thank you, Councillor Mansfield. Anyone else got any further comments? Councillor Maloney.
Thank you so much, and thank you very much for the comments of both the developers and constituents as well tonight. I think that I'm pretty impressed with the knowledge of the local community with respect to planning and overlays. I think some of you are incredible experts and have become experts because of issues like this. In the Local Government Act 2020, we were almost mandated to increase our deliberative engagement, and I would really encourage any future applications for developments of this sort to seek out deliberative engagement with the community, because we all work in symbiosis. All of us councillors regularly hear from community as to what is and isn't working, and I love to listen to that, and I really appreciate that. And I'm surprised that some of that feedback isn't appreciated, because I know that I really appreciate when someone tells me I've got spinach in my teeth, and then when someone tells me that I'm going to mess up a community that doesn't want a development there. I think that the natural environment, as Councillor Aiken so aptly described, the native grasslands, I'd love to see some native grasses, shrubs and the like to pepper our streets. I think if we engaged with that deliberative, engagement, I guess, and also perhaps the Indigenous species to the region were considered, perhaps the outcome might be different. So I'm hoping that I can see in the future some different planning applications that have thoroughly taken into consideration the community's wishes. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Maloney. Councillor Mason, do you wish to make a comment?
I'll try and make some additional comments. I too, I would like to point out that we have moved into an era of higher quality community engagement, and we do expect that. I'm disappointed that that there hasn't been enough movement from the original density to what we have now, and I also understand, as Councillor Mansfield said, that the need for higher density living, but the higher the density, you also need a greater area of recreational area, an open space, and so it's not only the number of houses or the number of residents per unit area, but it's the amount of public space as well. And so there's a sort of a diversity there that we need to be looking at, and I'm really sorry that there doesn't seem to be enough movement there, and that I'm also sorry that opportunities haven't been taken to enhance the rural character, enhance the environment. And I heard someone say that some of the grassland areas were degraded, but that's the natural environment, and it could be enhanced. And I note that there's a mixture of exotic trees and native trees, canopy trees. All these things ought to be going towards what the character of a rural community is and how you might enhance it. And so I'm somehow or other, on balance, disappointed with this. There could have been a lot more done with that space, and I can't support the current proposal.
Thank you, Councillor Mason. So on that note, I don't really have much further to say that my other councillors haven't already said. So we're going to put this to the vote. So all those in favour of the alternate recommendation? That's carried. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for attending. That's the end of the planning meeting. Have a good night. Thank you.